Trump is not serious about seeking a negotiated settlement. And we saw that on Thursday. One of Iran's demands was that look, there's got to be a ceasefire in place between Hezbollah and Israel. You can't ignore Hezbollah. Hezbollah has to be part of this. And if it's not, then we're not going to. This process is dead. So the Trump administration, and I'm not sure it was Trump, may have been J.D. Vance, but they pressed forward and put pressure on Israel, and Israel caved and said, okay. So far, that ceasefire has held between Israel and Hezbollah. But at the same time, then you had Scott Bessent come out and announce new sanctions on Iran. Yeah, we're going to collect their money, and we're telling all the Gulf Arabs, go after their bank accounts. And while we're at it, we're going to continue sanctioning Russia and China as well. Now, what I learned early on during my time in government, the purpose of a national security advisor is to coordinate U.S. policy so that everybody's playing from the same sheet of music, that you're not doing contradictory things, like you're not securing a ceasefire on one hand, but then violating doing the exact opposite, because one of Iran's other demands was, hey, end the sanctions. Sanctions got to go away, because otherwise we're not going to talk. And instead they did that. And then, Iran, even though they blocked.
Larry cuts straight to the heart of the inconsistency when he explains that one of Iran's demands was that there's got to be a ceasefire in place between Hezbollah and Israel, and that Hezbollah has to be part of this. He notes that the Trump administration did press Israel, resulting in a ceasefire that has held. Yet, at the same time, then you had Scott Bessent come out and announce new sanctions on Iran. We're going to collect their money, and we're telling all the Gulf Arabs, go after their bank accounts. Larry emphasizes that the role of a national security advisor is to coordinate U.S. policy so that everybody's playing from the same sheet of music, warning that contradictory actions, securing a ceasefire while simultaneously violating Iran's other core demand that sanctions got to go away, otherwise we're not going to talk, destroy any chance of genuine negotiations. This mixed messaging is portrayed not as oversight but as deliberate bad faith tactics that signal to Iran the U.S. is not serious about a deal. The segment exposes how these policy contradictions undermine trust and make the entire negotiation process appear performative rather than substantive. Takeaway: sending contradictory signals, ceasefire on one hand, fresh sanctions on the other, doesn't look like serious negotiation. It looks like bad faith gamesmanship. Follow for more unfiltered geopolitical breakdowns. Hit that follow button. Is the U.S. actually negotiating or just playing both sides?
Blockade was announced. It was not a real blockade. I mean, you don't have enough ships. The U.S. doesn't have enough ships deployed to actually do an effective blockade. And but even the entire premise of a blockade is nonsensical, because you've got people in the Trump administration that they're talking as if we just do this blockade, man, it's going to put so much economic pressure on Iran that they're going to have to cave. And I'm looking. Has anybody paid attention to Cuba over the last 66 years? We've had a pretty effective blockade on Cuba, and yet, they're still standing, and they don't have any of the advantages that Iran does. I mean, Cuba's an island. Cuba doesn't have vast natural resources other than some great tobacco and great cigars. Here's Iran, which has, it's got Turkmenistan on its border. It can interact freely, travel through there. Goods can come in. The same with the Caspian Sea and direct access to Russia. So it's just a nonsensical policy. So this, but Iran is being firm. We know what we want. We've told you what we want. If you're serious about doing this, let's go forward. I think a lot of what Trump has been announcing is we got agreement. Oh, yeah, the Iranians are doing everything we tell them to do. No, it's not true. And it's more designed to manipulate the stock market, manipulate the oil market. And these people that are buying into Trump's rhetoric, intelligent people are buying into this. To me, it's shocking.
Larry systematically dismantles the blockade strategy, declaring the entire premise of a blockade is nonsensical because you don't have enough ships. The U.S. doesn't have enough ships deployed to actually do an effective blockade. He draws a direct parallel to Cuba, asking, has anybody paid attention to Cuba over the last 66 years? We've had a pretty effective blockade on Cuba, and yet they're still standing. Larry then highlights Iran's geographic advantages. Unlike Cuba, which is an island, Iran has Turkmenistan on its border, can interact freely. The same with the Caspian Sea and direct access to Russia. Goods can come in. He calls out the Trump administration's belief that if we just do this blockade, man, it's going to put so much economic pressure on Iran that they're going to have to cave, labeling it nonsensical policy given Iran's land borders, natural resources, and alliances. Mario agrees that Trump's announcements are more about manipulate the stock market, manipulate the oil market, than realistic pressure. The analysis reveals how the blockade ignores basic geography and history, making it an ineffective tool from the start. Takeaway: geography and alliances make Iran far more blockade-resistant than any island nation. The strategy was never realistic. Can sanctions ever break a country with land borders and powerful friends?
You're talking about Trump as if he's a normal, rational human being. Okay.
I get this a lot.
Yeah. And I admire your willingness to be gracious in that regard. Okay, so it's an element of maturity on your part. But I did an interview with Robert Barnes. I don't know if you know who Robert Barnes is, but he's well plugged in to the White House and particularly through J.D. Vance. There is something fundamentally wrong with Trump in terms of mentally. I've seen physicians online claim that it's symptoms consistent with prefrontal dementia, and the way the couple of the signs of that are the lack of emotional control. So you've seen these outbursts by Trump on, particularly on social media, where he's attacking people that were some of his strongest supporters, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Alex Jones. Megyn Kelly was not seen as a big supporter of his, especially in 2016, but for 2024, she definitely was. He's attacked people, Riley Gaines, the Pope. I mean, he's flying off the handle, noticeable in the fall, last September. And it, like with each passing week, it appears to be more extreme. Now, the other element of the prefrontal dementia is called confabulation. And confabulation is when Trump will say things that he absolutely believes are true, but they're not true. They're lies, or it's wrong. And so he's not one of these people who's being deceptive and lying. He's saying things, like, for example, that Iran has agreed to let us pick up their nuclear dust, as he calls it. And Iran's going, no, we haven't. Roy Kahn died on my wife's unit. My wife was the head nurse at the National Institutes of Health, and he died there. He died of AIDS. He was a closeted homosexual, and and he hid it for years. But he was a nasty piece of work. And what you were going to say about Kahn is that Trump's attitude, you don't basically admit nothing, deny everything, make counter accusations. Oh, exactly. And so Trump in the past, though, he had a reputation for actually being kind to people. That he played this persona on TV where you're fired, but in reality, because of his insecurities, he was so desperate to be liked, he didn't like having to fire people, and he didn't like getting into a personal conflict. That, whatever that was in his mind, man, that's broken. because I mean he's going after people viciously.
He
Uh,
is. He is.
what he did with Marjorie Taylor Greene in particular, when called her
I like MTG.
when he called her a traitor, and then she started getting death threats, and she had death threats against one of her children, and so she called him up to say, "Hey, look, your rhetoric is getting me these death threats," and instead of him providing any kind of empathy and saying, "Yeah, I'm sorry, I may have gone over," no, he basically said, "Oh, you deserve it."
Larry, citing Robert Barnes and physicians, states there is something fundamentally wrong with Trump in terms mentally, with symptoms consistent with prefrontal dementia. He points to the lack of emotional control seen in Trump's outbursts, particularly on social media, where he attacks former allies like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Alex Jones, the Pope. The second key symptom is confabulation, where Trump will say things that he absolutely believes are true, but they're not true, such as claiming Iran has agreed to let us pick up their nuclear dust. Larry traces the aggressive style to mentor Roy Cohn. Deny everything, make counter-accusations, deny accusations, always go on the attack, and then twist everything into a personal victory. You keep repeating something until everyone believes it's true. Mario acknowledges the pattern, noting Trump's past reputation for being kind to people has shifted into vicious personal attacks, including telling MTG she deserved it after death threats. This segment frames Trump's behavior as potentially impairing rational policymaking on Iran. Takeaway: when a leader confabulates and attacks allies, policy becomes unpredictable and personal rather than strategic. Follow for more unfiltered geopolitical breakdowns. Hit that follow button. Is Trump's behavior strategic theater or something deeper?
He's looking for an exit ramp, but the kind of exit ramp that exists for him, I'm afraid, would require him to make some admissions or concessions that he's not willing to make, and therefore I think we're on a path of an inevitable collision, and it is his words have been driving the stock market up. What happened yesterday was just, to me, unbelievable. The Dow Jones went up more than 1,000 points, and the oil market was falling down into the 80s.
Yeah,
and
it's still there. It's still below 85, I think.
Yeah, folks,
85.
The oil, the 20% shortage of oil is only now starting to hit countries. It's going to be real. That a lot of people thought that on February 28th and March 1st, right when the war started, that the tap got turned off, and it did. But the supply of the world was not immediately affected because you had ships on the tankers on the high seas selling to various destinations to offload that oil. Well, all those tankers have now arrived at those destinations. They've offloaded, and you don't have a fresh load of new tankers lined up behind coming in. So from this point forward, the reality of a 20% reduction in the supply of global oil, that is real. The same for liquid natural gas, the same for helium. And that is having an economic effect that's going to drag down the world economy. There's no way to avoid this. Even if today let's say that Iran finally said, okay, we agree with Trump, we're going to do everything that Trump wants. The blockade is lifted, everything is turned back on, and that goes with the assumption that there's not been damage to the ability of the Gulf Arabs to actually pump oil now. But it just assumes that everything's perfect. It's going to be 2 months, minimum 2 months, before the supply is back to where it was on February 27th.
Yeah.
Mario explains that the 20% shortage of oil is only now starting to hit countries because all those tankers have now arrived at those destinations. They've offloaded, and you don't have a fresh load of new tankers lined up behind coming in. Larry adds that even if today they agree, the blockade is lifted, it will still take 2 months, minimum 2 months, before the supply is back to where it was on February 27th. The discussion covers ripple effects on liquid natural gas, helium, the world economy, noting markets were forward-looking and priced in optimism, keeping oil still below 85 despite the disruption. Mario points out that a year ago oil was in the 50s, 60s, making current levels still high as traders forecast prolonged recovery. The segment stresses that the real economic pain from the supply shock is only beginning, regardless of any immediate diplomatic breakthroughs. Takeaway: markets can ignore physics for a while, but supply shocks eventually hit balance sheets and voters. How long before the oil pain forces Washington to change course?
The United States actually has limited military operations. I disagree with Professor Pape on the so-called ground operation. Yes, the United States is considering right now inserting special operations forces to go after the highly enriched uranium. That would be, in fact, I saw one of these generals on television saying, "Yeah, it'd take 10,000 troops to do it, but yeah, we could do it." And I'm going, okay. Do you realize the C-130, which is the most likely aircraft that would be used to insert troops? One C-130 can carry 90 paratroopers with a combat load. 90. Okay, so just do the math. You've got so you need 10,000 troops. You're going to need, what was that? You're going to need hundreds of C-130s to do that. And then where do they land? Or if you're going to conduct an actual invasion of Iran, because when I hear ground, we've got the ground operations, you're talking something like what we did to Iraq in 2003, where the United States assembled forces, 165,000 in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, and then went roaring across the border. Well, we don't really have that luxury. We could assemble those troops right now in Kuwait or Saudi Arabia, but they're within range of even the short-range ballistic missiles out of Iran, not to mention the medium-range or intermediate-range ballistic missiles and cruise missiles. So it's just the United States is not in a position. One, we don't have the forces. I mean, the Army's total strength right now is 452,000. What you'd be talking about is trying to assemble a ground force of, there's just no practical ground solution. So
I agree.
You take that away. What about the Navy? Well, we've seen the Navy, even with the so-called blockade, and I put parentheses around it, because the ships have to stand so far offshore because they're afraid of getting hit by Iran's coastal defense cruise missiles, their short-range ballistic missiles, drones, both underwater, surface level, and then aerial drones. So you basically taken the Navy out of the equation. That just leaves airplanes launching munitions, TLAMs and JDAMs and Tomahawks. But the United States is not even in a position now where it can fly at will over the territory of Iran, because Iran now they've proven, we're told, Trump says, we've wiped out their air defense system. Well, okay, then what has brought down that $250 million drone, the Triton? What's brought down the F-15? What's brought down, so you go down this list of aircraft and drones.
The A-10s, the C-130s, or C-130s were destroyed on the ground, but the A-10 and the F-35 that was damaged as well.
Yeah. So
multiple drones.
Yeah. So let's concede that whatever damage has been done to the Iranian air defense system is not complete at all. And in fact, reportedly, China is now really bolstered. They've built up that capability. I know from talking to one of my friends that they're very, very concerned that Iran is now in a much stronger position. If we go back to the hot war, and try to fly into Iran, that I was told with no hesitation, says, yeah, we're going to lose pilots. And then then we're going to face that spectacle of American pilots being paraded around on television, perhaps.
Larry runs precise numbers. A ground operation to seize enriched uranium would take 10,000 troops, but one C-130 can carry 90 paratroopers. So you're going to need hundreds of C-130s with no safe landing zones, as forces would be within range of even the short-range ballistic missiles. He dismisses air power alone because Iran now is in a much stronger position after proving it can shoot down high-value assets like the Triton drone and damage F-15s. Larry notes China has bolstered Iran's defenses with systems reportedly even more capable than the S-3 and S-400s. He contrasts this with past failures, Houthis Vietnam, where bombing never forced surrender without ground troops, something the U.S. lacks the force structure to provide. The segment concludes that modern missiles, drones, and geography have rendered large-scale U.S. military options against Iran practically suicidal. Takeaway: modern missiles and geography have made large-scale U.S. military action against Iran practically impossible without catastrophic losses. Follow for more unfiltered geopolitical breakdowns. Hit that follow button. If military options are off the table, what's left for the U.S.?
The entire, relationship with Iran, it was poisoned in the 1980s. The 1980s really was the critical decade that has completely shaped U.S.-Iranian relations, because it was in the 80s that basically the United States not only backed, we weren't a sort of a passive supporter, we were an aggressive part of Saddam Hussein's attack on Iran and that 8-year war. We provided basically the chemical weapons that were used, or the precursor chemicals that were used to make them. We provided intelligence so that Iraq's military forces would know where to attack Iran. And Iran at that time, was legitimately trying to support Hezbollah. Hezbollah emerged in 82. It was in the midst of this, the civil war in Lebanon. And because the Shia were being attacked, and then when Israel invaded, there was always that tension between the Shia and the Palestinians with the PLO. PLO was very much a secular organization. PLO advocated a two-state solution, and the Hezbollah was coming in and saying, no, just a one-state. And so the United States was basically at war with Hezbollah. Hezbollah was retaliating. Iran was supporting them. And so that's where that whole, I'll call it, it's not mythology, but the whole narrative that Iran is a supporter of terrorism, because Iran was supporting Hezbollah, and Hezbollah was in a battle against the United States.
I think the term terrorism, Larry, you know more than anyone. It's a politicized, weaponized term in most cases.
Yeah, exactly right. It's really sort of meaningless. But out of that, we failed to appreciate, and it didn't help that the pictures. If you ever saw the pictures of the Ayatollah Khomeini, I mean, he had this very angry, he wasn't like Uncle Ko, he wasn't a warm, cuddly kind of guy. And so then the mythology that Iran was this strict, religious, fanatical, Sharia law kind of place. And I just saw, I think it was Reuters or somebody just shot a news story in Iran where they're going around talking to people on the street. And 90% of the women that appeared in this video, they didn't have head coverings. Walking along, and so Iran is actually lightened up.
Larry traces the poisoned U.S.-Iran relationship to the 1980s, when the U.S. was an aggressive part of Saddam Hussein's attack on Iran, providing chemical weapons, precursor chemicals, and intelligence for attacks, all while Iran supported Hezbollah in Lebanon. Mario then outlines his pragmatic 4-point proposal. 1. Accept a proposal similar to the pre-war Oman offer for dismantling the nuclear program. 2. Unfreeze Iranian assets and lift the sanctions in exchange for Iran dismantling their proxy network, especially Hezbollah merging into the Lebanese military with security guarantees. 3. Allow a temporary Iranian booth, a toll booth at the Shadow Huz. And 4. Force Israel to withdraw from Lebanese territories. Both agree Iran has been pretty principled in its support for allies, unlike U.S. flip-flopping, e.g., Iran-Contra. The segment presents a realistic off-ramp that respects Iran's red lines while offering face-saving concessions. Takeaway: a face-saving deal is possible if the U.S. stops treating Iran as pawns and starts treating it as a rational actor with red lines. Could a pragmatic deal actually stick? Or is history too poisoned?